Joining us now, I'm delighted he's with us, former governor of Minnesota, likely presidential candidate, Tim Pawlenty. Governor Pawlenty, how are you?
I'm great, Laura. How are you?
I'm terrific. Richard Lugar is making a point that, frankly, a lot of other Republicans are making on Capitol Hill now, that we have gotten ourselves involved in this Libya conflict, whatever we want to refer to it as. What is your position on this? Do you agree with the Secretary of Defense that Libya is not in our vital interests?
Well, my position is this, Laura. I supported the no-fly zone in early March when the rebels had momentum, when they had Gaddafi on the ropes, when he was openly talking about resigning and leaving voluntarily, and he could have been nudged out by them, and I think the no-fly zone would have worked had we exerted prompt leadership and more forceful leadership at the time. In terms of where we are now, Muammar Gaddafi is a psychopath. He's a confirmed terrorist. He has the blood of Americans on his hands. Reagan tried to kill him. And now we have the opportunity through the manifestation of the people's own interest to get him out, And I think that should be our objective at this point. When the President of the United States says Gaddafi has to go or should go, then Gaddafi needs to go.
Well, the problem with that, though, Governor, is that the Secretary of Defense has said that, look, this regime change thing, he said this yesterday, is really difficult. And getting rid of a leader should not be a part of our foreign policy engagement because it's so difficult. If we're not going to do it, we're not going to do it. And so he's saying something totally different.
It's not that difficult in the sense that you see now that the air cover has been established and the help provided. The rebels have gone from being nearly defeated after having Gaddafi on the ropes to retaking the momentum. And what I called for early on, again, this was early March, was establish the no-fly zone when they had him on the ropes. And this would also, by the way, reinforce the initial rationale, which was to stop the slaughter. So each one of these countries, each one of these situations is complex. It's difficult. It has a lot of history, a lot of context around it relative to our interests in the region and more broadly. But in this case, you had a psychopathic, confirmed terrorist killing, or at least threatening to kill and slaughter his own people, and we intervened to stop it.
Well, how is that different from what's happening in the Ivory Coast?
Well, again, each of these is different. We're not going to go in and establish a military intervention in every country.
Why? You just set a benchmark that, in my mind, is pretty low. I mean, we have people killing their own people all over this globe.
Well,
and yet the United States military doesn't jump in to save the day every time.
That's right, and we do have the option to pick and choose as to how and when we go in relative to our interests and what our standards and our values are. In this case, the President said, we're not going to allow the slaughter and Gaddafi has to go, and when the United States puts its prestige and its reputation on the mark with those benchmarks, we need to finish the job.
Right, I understand that, Governor, but you presumably are going to want to be President of the United States, and you're going to have to make these calls if you're elected. And my question to you is, do you think that it was in our vital interests to move as we did against Libya? And if so, why aren't we moving against other dictators around the world who've killed far more of their own people than Gaddafi?
Well, again, let's look at some of the circumstances here in Libya that it may have some overlap with other circumstances and may be somewhat unique. Number one, Gaddafi is a terrorist who's killed Americans. Number two, he had nuclear ambitions. In fact, until recently when he agreed to give them up, he had nuclear ambitions. Three, he has weapons of mass destruction. Four, he was on the verge of, through his own words and actions, slaughtering his own people.
So is it in our vital interest, though? Is it in our vital interest?
The manifestation of his own people to topple him. As to our vital interest in Libya, what are they? Well, when you have people who've killed Americans, that's one measure of our vital interest. How do we respond to people who have actively engaged in wanting to kill and terrorize Americans? That's one consideration.
Well, okay. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but I am trying to understand this. And the next question to you on this conflict, and we're going to move on to domestic politics, Governor, is do you know who these rebels are?
Well, that's the question with all these countries is going to be this question, Laura. Is this about freedom and democracy and supporting our values, or at least moving in our direction, namely free and fair elections, democracy, free and fair flow of information, human rights? Or is this about sex, tribes, and other agendas?
And Al-Qaeda.
And Al-Qaeda taking over. So you don't know what comes next, which is a legitimate question and something that in all these countries, with it unfolding so rapidly in this Arab Spring, is something that is going to unfold over time. But what we do know this, what we have there now is a situation that has been on a confirmed basis hostile to the United States of America.
Now, National Review has written that you are a really strong candidate in the Republican primaries once you announce because of your own proximity to Iowa. And obviously everyone knows why Iowa is important. And it goes on to say you're the only candidate likely to run who's represented a state that borders Iowa. That geographical proximity will allow him to effectively make the case that he knows the worries and dreams of the Hawkeye State Republicans best. Do you think the Hawkeye State Republicans and the citizens of America, with what's happening in this economy today, want to get involved in another foreign conflict?
Well, the polls show that they're split on that, and people, of course, when you ask them how they feel about things, want to focus on the economy and jobs first and foremost. That's understandable. But as with all these things, the world is large and complex with lots of moving pieces, and we can't just have the luxury of doing one thing at a time. And so do we need to focus on the economy and jobs? Of course. But the first order of business for the United States federal government is to secure our national security interests here and abroad and those of our allies. And so we don't have the luxury of when history visits and knocks on the door to say, we're busy, sorry, we'll look at it later.
This was an ad that you cut a while ago, and, it wouldn't be me, Governor, if I wasn't going to tease you about something. Let's listen.
I'm Janet Napolitano, Democratic Governor of Arizona.
And I'm Tim Pawlenty, Republican Governor of Minnesota. We don't always share the same views,
but we both agree it's time for Congress to deal with the real threat of climate change.
If we act now, we can create thousands of new jobs in clean energy industries before our overseas competitors beat us to it. So come on, Congress, let's get moving. Cap greenhouse gas pollution now.
Does that just give you a real stomachache to hear now?
Well, anybody who's going to run for this office who's been in an executive position or may run has got some clunkers in their record. Laura, mine I think are fewer and less severe than most as to climate change, or more specifically cap and trade. I've just come out and admitted and said, look, it was a mistake. It was stupid. I'm not going to try to defend it. And so everybody's going to have a few of those. I've got a few, but like I said, any of mine are less severe and less frequent than others. But
I've teased Gingrich about his sit-on. Remember the couch ad he did with Nancy Pelosi?
Well,
that was tragic.
Everybody in the race, or it was the big names in the race, embraced climate change or cap and trade at one point or another, every one of us. And so there is nobody who's been in an executive position whose name is being bantered in a first or second tier way who hasn't embraced it. So in some way, the question is, in my case, I said, look, I made a mistake. Cap and trade would be a ham-fisted, unhelpful, damaging thing to the economy. It's misguided. I made the mistake. I admit it. I'm not trying to be cute about it. I've just come out and tell you it was a mistake.
And it looks like, the Heritage Foundation study, and I know you've already seen this, but 2 million jobs would have been lost if the cap and trade bill that favored by the Obama administration and obviously at that point Governor Napolitano would have passed. So it would have been a devastating effect on an already dragging economy.
Yeah, Laura, this isn't something new that I've said. I wrote a letter opposing this after originally flirting with it almost 2 years ago. So this is not a development in the last few months.
Right. And we're not going to see you go around in like a broccoli-powered bus or anything like Dennis Kucinich did, right?
No, but like I said, anybody who's running's got the same kind of issues, and particularly on this example, but many others as well. So the question isn't, is everybody perfect? No, they're not. And anybody who's perfect isn't going to run, and there isn't anybody who's perfect. The question is, once you've made a mistake, do you recognize it? Do you admit it? Are you willing to come forward and say, are you a big enough person to say, it was the wrong thing to do? Like everybody else, I've made some mistakes, and that one was one of mine.
Minnesota Nice here on the Laura Ingraham Show. Governor Tim Pawlenty, stay with us.
The Laura Ingraham Show.